heavily monetized, mediocre story mode infested with loot boxes, and a reskin of the previous year accurately describes almost every sports game from 2016 up until now. Aside from some updated graphics due to new consoles, sports is the most stagnant genre in gaming, yet the most profitable as well. Why wouldn't you, as a gaming company, repackage the same game every year, update the roster, and make small, meaningless changes to the game so you can sell it again for $60 and reset all the progress made in last year's game so people have to buy the same loot boxes all over again? Ideally, sports games should be crossplay since consoles are finally catching up to PC, and this genre is mostly played with a controller, so there's no obvious gameplay advantage to PC or consoles, unlike shooter games where you have aim assist for consoles or higher skill ceiling for PC players since a mouse and a keyboard offer better control. That still didn't stop Call of Duty and Fortnite from having full crossplay across all platforms. Ideally, sports games would have a service model like Rainbow Six Siege or Call of Duty, where the game receives seasonal content that can be accessed for free if you grind for it or purchase with microtransactions, but without giving any gameplay advantages. Ideally, the games would have the rosters of every single team in the most obscure leagues, with fully translated UI to every language. Ideally, none of the loot boxes would be tied to progress or give you gameplay advantages, and none of the microtransactions would be tied to upgrading your player, like VC in NBA 2K. Sadly, it doesn't look like we'll get any crossplay ability anytime soon, since sports games are less popular on PC and aren't a large enough share of the revenue generated through those games. That's why if you buy NBA 2K21 for PC, you get the PS4 and Xbox One version of the game, even though the PC community has way better hardware than consoles, and they could have played the 2021 version of the game 2 years ago. They wouldn't do crossplay for those games because then they would have to allocate resources to fight cheating programs, which are more easily accessed and created for the PC versions of the game. They wouldn't do crossplay since copy-pasting the game from console would require more effort to port it over rather than the lazy copy-paste they do every year. NBA 2K has been riddled with frame rate related bugs for years on PC due to the bad optimization of the game, and they haven't been addressed to this day. Sadly, sports games would never have a service model because they would have to give up selling the game each year for $60. They wouldn't be able to reset the progress you made on your Ultimate Team or your My Player, so that means no more microtransactions you could buy. There's only so many unique additions and legendary players you can sell before even the biggest whale would stop buying them. Eventually, you max out your My Player, and the additional builds you created for variety so you wouldn't need to buy any more VC, even for cosmetics, which are outrageously priced right now. Buying your team shirt would cost you a full game salary. A service model would mean they'd have to create seasonal content and actually put effort into the game instead of buffing up a certain player and selling it to you through card packs that might contain him. Sadly, they would never have a full roster that would encompass every single league since it's probably too much effort for very little gain. You would need to design every single player to a passable point no matter how obscure he is. You would have to put resources into something that is not a net positive endeavor for the game, and the same goes for translating the game to every language including its UI. Initially, it's easy to agree with and not fault the companies for avoiding this. If you take a look, however, at FIFA 2001, they actually had an official Hebrew version for the game with Hebrew commentary by Israeli commentators and the Israeli League.
בין מכבי תל אביב והפועל באר שבע. תקראנו להסברים מפיו של פרשננו מר אבי מלר.
Keep in mind that Hebrew is a language spoken by less than 1% of the world's population, and Israel at that time had less than 6.5 million people living in it. The female roster of both NBA 2K and FIFA are a niche part of the game that is hardly played by the community and doesn't drive a significant amount of sales or revenue to justify the resources put into it. Luckily, we can make the claim without any studies or stats because there are no female players you can put into your Ultimate Team, which generates a large portion of the revenue for FIFA, and the online WNBA mode for NBA 2K has no microtransactions tied to progression at all. Sadly, loot boxes and microtransactions would always be tied to progress in sports games since it's the norm. Most of the players playing sports games are casual gamers and have been conditioned by mobile games to accept loot boxes and microtransactions. On top of that, every sports YouTuber doing pack opening videos has normalized loot boxes and even helped the game get more people buying them because they think they can get the same rare player they saw on YouTube. The average FIFA, Madden, or NBA player is not concerned with how anti-consumer the games are, and they wouldn't boycott the game because of the social aspect of it. There aren't a lot of players playing the previous edition of a sports game, and they are usually not supported anyway. You want to have the current version of the game so the next time you're playing against your buddies, you have a feel for the meta and gameplay this year. You would never boycott the game because there aren't any real competitors that offer a large enough community with the good gameplay you're used to. Despite all the negative press the games are getting and even the low scores they receive in reviews by mainstream gaming media, they still generate a ridiculous amount of revenue and with very little cost of production each year. You would be a fool to give that up, and no company would give it up unless they're mandated by the government, like they are in Belgium, where loot boxes are completely illegal and are recognized for their predatory nature. The second option to get rid of loot boxes is a huge backlash, much like in Battlefront, which resulted in the most downvoted Reddit comment in history and completely separated progression from quote-unquote surprise mechanics. The government option is the more likely one since discussions about loot boxes and their nature is ramping up around the world. The fact that sports games are more casual, unlike Battlefront, means that we wouldn't see a large enough backlash or a boycott anytime soon. If you take each idea we suggested to improve sports games separately, it would be terrible to implement as a game company since it would require lots of resources and would probably result in less revenue generated by the game. If you combine them together, however, it would be an overall improvement with the potential to make more money. If the games would have crossplay and finally stop ignoring the PC community, they will finally have a large enough share of PC players in the community to justify more resources allocated to it. Just look at the recent efforts by Call of Duty to finally better optimize the PC version of the game. If you use the game as a service model, you can have a battle pass only filled with cosmetic items like Fortnite, which will supplement the revenue lost each year by not selling the game. If you have 6 seasons of content that you charge $10 for every time, you pretty much sell the game each year through cosmetic items. You can also sell unique cosmetic bundles outside of the battle pass like you have in Call of Duty to make up for the revenue lost from not selling loot boxes. You could afford to translate the game to every language because if it's a service model, you don't have to translate a new title every year. Only the small additions you make whenever you would update the UI or add new content, and the same goes for adding every league and every player to the game. I would point again to Call of Duty, which had completely forsaken paid DLC for free seasonal content and removed all loot boxes in favor of the much easier to ingest Battle Pass scheme. Call of Duty still made $3 billion last year and didn't antagonize the player base by trying to milk them for every single cent in their pockets. The Battle Pass for Call of Duty being a huge success is a battle won and progress made towards getting rid of loot boxes. While none of the sports games will give it up willingly, it seems like we will get there eventually thanks to the UK government finally addressing loot boxes and their insidious nature. It's truly a sad statement to make when the future of sports gaming is now in the hands of the government, but that's where we are right now, and that's the only realistic way out. The ESRB still rates NBA 2K and FIFA as E for everyone, despite the gambling nature of loot boxes and the fact you can actually bet VC online against other players, which is just gambling with an extra step. You can't cash in your VC that you earned, but you can keep buying VC to gamble it away. The ESRB guideline specifically says that simulated gambling should give the game a teen rating, so that means FIFA and Madden. As for NBA 2K, it should be rated as adults only because the game contains real gambling. Most games will use visual and audio cues similar to a slot machine to get you addicted to buying loot boxes, but they will never outright admit it. Any plausible deniability went out the window when the NBA 2K20 My Team trailer released, showcasing an actual slot machine. They didn't even attempt to hide their true meaning or what they were going for, and honestly at this point, you deserve it for buying the game every single year despite the lack of meaningful updates, lack of bug fixes for bugs that sometimes plagued the game for years. Keeping in those terrible servers with terrible connections and constant crashes. In the case of NBA 2K, you don't even have matchmaking for My Player Online when you need to wait in line for a game just like you would in real life. Gaming is about keeping the fun, realistic aspects of the game while ditching the terrible ones like waiting for the next game instead of instantly finding a new one. You deserve the ads you get before your game loads every time. Usually, they wait for the end of the year, so no one cares. But in NBA 2K21, you got an ad only a month after the game came out, a AAA game that cost $60, an old gen, and $70 for the new gen. Buying a $60 game back in the day usually meant that that's it. You can play and enjoy the game entirely with no microtransactions, purchases, and ads in the game were strictly relegated to free games since it was the only viable business model for them. Paying $60 guaranteed you'd have to spend nothing on it again, maybe with the exception of DLC content, but now it's the norm, and who can blame them? The invention of the Ultimate Team in 2009, which essentially made FIFA the first AAA title that is pay to win and not a free game. Ultimate Team and the implementation of that mechanic into other EA games had multiplied the company's value by 8 in only 10 years until people finally had enough when Battlefront came out and you have to grind 40 hours of gameplay just to unlock Darth Vader. Instead of expecting the same pushback from the casual gamers who don't really care about the issue and will buy the new NBA, Madden, or FIFA every year, we should put pressure on our politicians to finally address it. We should not support YouTubers who normalize paid loot box opening videos for games. We should show the new generations of gamers that grows up playing Brawl Stars that progression tied to paid loot boxes is a terrible game design that should be removed from every single game, even the free ones. Lots of players would gladly pony up a few bucks to buy some skins like in Teamfight Tactics, which is a free game with zero non-cosmetic microtransactions. We should support loudly and financially games who use this type of monetization and name and shame every game that ties its progression to your wallet. And if we don't, and the government won't step in, millions of people will still buy the same repetitive, uninventive, heavily monetized sports games, and they only have themselves to blame for it.